Life's a Rehearsal by Robert Putt, a short précis and a foreword. My mother left me when I was just 2 years old to be raised by my nan. I was a naughty kid, and in my teens came close to crossing the wrong side of the tracks, but discovering acting gave me a focus, and it really saved my life. In more recent years I've written, directed and produced. Around 40 I visited my mother just the once in Los Angeles, which seemed to prompt the death of 2 people. I've been a husband and a dad. I've met some amazing people from all walks of life. Now in my mid-70s, I'm fit, active and focused, and trying always to keep true to the maxim, carpe diem, seize the day. I've called my story Life's a Rehearsal because a large part of my working life as an actor has been spent rehearsing, learning and going over the story to be told until it's ready. I also believe much of what happens to us in our personal lives is a rehearsal too, a learning curve in preparation for the next time we encounter or are confronted by similar scenarios. Life is, in many respects, like playing a sport. Every game of football is different, but the premise is the same, to help get the ball in the back of the net. Having said that, the X Factor can happen. But as John Lennon sang in All You Need Is Love, you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. On this very personal journey, I've tried to tell as much about the times I've lived in, and, for what it's worth, how those times have made me the person I am today. The second half of the 20th century developed into a threshold of opportunity for all, but particularly for the working class. With better paid jobs, we were now able to plan, instead of living from hand to mouth. Further education was there for those who wanted it. We could look beyond the factory floor and train as architects, doctors, solicitors, teachers, or, like me, become an actor, professions once almost exclusive occupations for the money middle classes. Our families were clothed and well fed. The NHS was free for all, and if needed, the welfare state was there to help support us. Owning a car, getting a mortgage, eating out, and taking holidays abroad soon followed. I was extremely fortunate to be born at such a time. A baby boomer, one who was born in the last year or so of the Second World War. In the 1960s, working-class heroes began to emerge in the theatre and films. Michael Caine, Tom Courtenay, Albert Finney, Terence Stamp. Writers like Lionel Bart, Harold Pinter, Arnold Wesker and Joe Orton. The pop groups like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones and the Who all gave us a voice and we lapped it up. On the threshold of manhood, I was lucky enough to take advantage of these times and grasp the day when the chance came along. And one particular chance encounter gave shape to the rest of my life. I was raised and nurtured in London's East End and lived there until I left drama school in the late 1960s. I'm not a true Cockney because I wasn't born anywhere near the sound of Bow Bells, but in the Chiltern Hills nursing home, High Wycombe, in the county of Buckinghamshire. Olive, my mother, was taking a respite from the war-torn capital and staying with some relatives who lived in Stoke-on-Church. High Wycombe was the countryside then, and Stoke-on-Church a small village. Now the area is part of the urban sprawl connected to Greater London by the motorway. Nearby to where Olive was staying was an American army base, throbbing with testosterone, generated by healthy, fit young men far from home. These glamorous-looking GIs, armed with nylons, Lucky Strikes, cigarettes and booze for the adults, Hershey bars, gum and sweets for the kids, were eager to make an impression and exploit what Bucks had to offer. Like most young girls of 16, Olive was eager to experience the joys of life, and I was the result of one of those joyful experiences. At least I hope I was. In the 9th day of March, 1944, I arrived. Bob, my GI dad, departed soon after. Bob had a wife back in the US of A, and when his commanding officer found out about me, he transferred his boy away from jolly old England to fornicate and fight further afield. He left me his name, Bob or Robert, and that was it. I was aged 2, the war was over. Olive, Eva and Jim, her mum and stepdad, settled back in their council flat in East London. In the 1940s, 50s, Britain, recovering from the ravages of war, America was still thought to be the land of plenty. Olive, still only in her late teens, had developed a taste for the glamorous promise the G.I. Joes seemed to offer, and according to my nan, as one soldier left by the front door, another came in through the back. Eventually, with the time's relaxed attitude to contraception, the inevitable happened, and Olive was once again in the family way. This time the soldier wasn't married, and quite happily for all concerned, my Nan Eva and my step-granddad, who I always called Uncle Jim, were left holding the baby. Me. Olive took the other Yanks baby, my half-brother Michael, and sailed across the pond as a war bride to join his father in Los Angeles. Many years would pass before we meet again. Life was a struggle for Eva. Like most working-class families, money was tight. Nan had a growing lad to look after, well, me, and a sick husband. Jim suffered from stomach cancer and could only work occasionally. Nan worked as a manageress of a laundry, known colloquially as the bag wash shop. Folk would bring their dirty clothes to the shop in off-white sacks. Nan marked the sacks with a number using a paintbrush dipped in ink. A van would collect the sacks and deliver them to a large laundry to be washed by machines and then returned. Nan's shop had the grand title of the King's Laundry. Nothing royal about it, it was the owner's name, Mr. King. There was a dry cleaning service, but that was generally reserved for getting your smart togs cleaned and pressed for special occasions. Now, having and keeping a suit for best was useful, but not only for weddings and funerals. It could be pledged at the pawnbrokers when times were tough. Nan's wage of just about £4 a week was usually the only money coming in, and what with the rent and food and heating and the general cost of living, there was very little cash left. So midweek, Nan would often have to pawn her wedding ring to make ends meet, retrieving it again when she was paid on the Friday. Nan was a proud woman and would often whisper in my ear, "I'm popping into Uncle's, Robbie, our secret." Nan still had a slight accent because she was originally from Hull in Yorkshire, and came down to London in the 1930s with her brothers and sisters to look for work. As pocket money, I was given a Sunday sixpence. That tiny silver coin, a tanner, which Nan could hardly afford, had so much love attached to it was nigh on biblical. Of course, I squandered it immediately on sweets and a comic. I loved the Beano and Dandy, and still remember the thrill of seeing the snow settled on top of the comic's title, because then I knew Christmas wasn't far away. Being a kid, of course, I accepted life as it was. I don't ever remember being hungry or cold, and always felt secure and loved. To supplement my need for sweets and comics, I ran errands for infirm or elderly neighbours for a few coppers. I sold horse droppings left by the Coleman's or rag and bone man's nag to anyone lucky enough to have a garden, backyard, or even a flower pot. In the run-up to fireworks night in November the 5th, I'd make up a guy by stuffing a few old togs with newspapers using a football or a balloon for its head and painted a face on it. I set it down on a busy street near a pub or a bus stop and chorus, "Got a penny for a guy, mister, lady?" Early December carol singing might line my pockets. If you were lucky, you could help the milkman on his float by putting the milk on the doorstep and collecting the empties. But if you were a very lucky kid and had a push bike, you could get a regular paper round. Not long after my mother left to join her husband in America, we moved, me, Nan and Uncle Jim, from our council flat in Bow to Broome House in Aldgate. We settled into the top floor of a 2-bedroom flat in Wentworth Street, which houses one of the oldest street markets in London. Aldgate has always been one of the locations in the UK where new immigrant communities first settled. When I lived there, it was predominantly a Jewish area. It's still very working class and thought to be part of the East End, but the City of London is just about 20 minutes walk away. If you take the tube to Aldgate East, cross the main road into Commercial Street. Wentworth Street is just down a bit on the left. I occasionally pop back to Aldgate and am pleased to see Broom House is still thriving. The estate's courtyard did have some garages set in the front of the apartment blocks, but with no one owning a car then, they were mainly used for storage. And today, where the garages once stood, there's a kids' playing area. Back in the day, Aldgate was said to be one of the haunts of Jack Sheppard, the highwayman, and in 1888 another Jack, the Ripper, practised his gory art on local working girls, which at the time there were many. Young women unable to get a job took to the streets to work as prostitutes. In the 1950s, the Jewish gangster Jack Spot Cromer and later Billy Hill were the godfathers of the time. Their successors, of course, and protégés of Hill in the 1960s were the Cray twins. The Jewish folk had left Aldgate by the mid-1960s, and the district is now a well-established Asian community, full of curry restaurants and shops selling Indian produce, jostling with art galleries and trendy boutiques. The area has quite an overlap from the business and artistic community now and is very trendy, gentrified with smart flats and eateries. Even Broom House has been given a bit of a facelift. The long-established old Spitalfields market off Commercial Road had sold fruit and veg since the 19th century. Now a cupboard market with stalls, mainly selling trendy, retro, vintage clothes and furniture. But thankfully the memories of my childhood are still very evident. I seemed to spend a lot of time on my own, because the kids on the council estate had long established friendships and family ties. My only real friend was Brenda, a little girl, a year or so older than myself. I wasn't that comfortable of having a girl as a friend, but I sort of tolerated Brenda and kind of allowed her to follow me around. And she did on occasions have her uses. I think Brenda liked me a lot and thought of me sort of as her boyfriend. During the long hot summer holidays, weren't they always, Brenda wore these little coloured frocks, slightly too short for her, that sometimes showed off her droopy knickers when they slipped below the hem, which made me feel a bit sort of queasy. Like most little boys, at the time I wore short trousers, held up by the almost obligatory snake-buckled elastic belt, short-sleeved shirts, socks and sandals. One day I saw Brenda crossing the square. I decided to give her a wide berth because she was pushing her old pram, which was too girly for a fine boy like me to be seen with. I wasn't really going anywhere, just meandering about, looking for something to do. I crossed over Commercial Road near to some waste ground that sat at the back of the Toynbee Hall Art Centre. I was nosing about when I noticed a large wooden door which didn't appear to have any locks. I gave the door a good tug, opened it just enough to slip through, and found it had a pile of coal inside. Well, being an enterprising kid, always on the lookout to make a bob or two, an idea immediately began to take shape. I got hold of a tin bucket from somewhere, or perhaps it was lying about inside, I'm not sure, but I knew a bucket would be useful to aid me with my intended coal heist. I filled the bucket up with as much coal as I could, but when I tried to shift it, it was too heavy. I could only just about manage to drag it noisily along the ground, with no chance of lifting it over the waste ground wall. I decided I needed help, and remembering seeing Brenda with her pram, I went in search. I found her sitting on the lower steps of our block. Once I explained my predicament and plan, she was only too pleased to be a willing partner. With Brenda and Pam in tow, I returned to the coal house. Inside the door, the bucket stood full of my black booty I had earlier loaded it up with. Together, Brenda and I lifted the bucket over the lower section of the wall and onto her pram. It creaked a bit, but with me taking some of the weight in the front and my helper pushing, it was the perfect transport. We pushed the pram across Commercial Road and through the gate of our estate. Knocking at the first ground floor of the flats, we proffered our wares to a lady who opened the door. A bucket of coal was a bargain at 3p a load, and we had no trouble shifting it to our cash-strapped neighbours. For a few days all was going well, and we upped the price to 4p, which gave us a fairer half share, instead of me just giving Brenda a penny for her troubles. Well, I was the brains behind the job. Nan got to hear about it, but instead of giving me a ticking off, said, "I could do with some coal, Robbie. Why didn't you tell me?" "Well, we'll go back, Nan, and get you some." Eventually, we must have pressed our luck and were probably seen a bit too often nipping in and out of the coal bunker with our bucket and pram. This particular day, when we dragged our booty out through the coal house door, a serious-looking woman was waiting, with her arms crossed. She seemed very tall. Well, we were only little kids, so she was to us. She was very slim, with dark hair, and I think she was wearing a blue frock, probably with flowers on it. Looking down on us, she said, with a very posh accent, "What do you think you're doing?" "Well, nothing, miss." "This is not your coat. It belongs to the hall, and you are stealing." "Oh, sorry, miss, we didn't know it was yours." To my surprise, Brenda started screeching, "Don't tell the coppers, miss, please, please, don't tell the coppers, we won't do it again, please, don't fetch the coppers." Then she started bawling like she was in pain. Well, whether this was an act on her part or what, I don't really know, but it seemed to do the trick. The cross lady began to comfort Brenda, squatting down with her arms around her, reassuring her she was not going to tell the police, but we must promise not to do it again. After Brenda had calmed down to a snivel, the lady stood up with a smile and said, "Now, we have a children's art class at the centre on a Saturday mornings, but why don't you come along?" I sort of nodded, not sure what she was on about, but it seemed a good move to make, as she seemed to be letting us off. Brenda said, "Oh, yes, miss, we will, miss." With that, we scooted off soon as. Brenda didn't go to the art class, but for some reason I thought I'd make an appearance. But just the once, because I was laughed at for putting a face on the sun I had drawn. I did creep back to the bunker a few weeks or so later, but it had been fitted with a heavy door and a big metal lock. Sad to say, poor Nan never did get her free bucket of coal. Today, where the coal bunker was, there's an extension to the hall dedicated to the politician John Profumo. The scandal known as the Profumo affair, involving a model, Christine Keeler, and a Russian diplomat. This led to Profumo's resignation and withdrawal from politics. After his resignation, Profumo began to work as a volunteer at the hall. I believe at first he began cleaning the toilets, but eventually he became the centre's chief fundraiser. These charitable activities helped to restore the fallen politician's reputation. Wandering down the market one hot summer's day, probably during the school holidays, I decided I liked the look of the nice juicy peaches set out temptingly at the edge of a stall. I had no money, but oh, how my mouth watered for a nice succulent peach. The display was about pocket high. I sidled up to the edge of the fruit box and slowly tried to roll the peach towards me. I'd almost made the heist when the storeholder spotted me. "Oh, you little mother, put it back! Fuck off, you smock!" With that I ran off, clutching the fruit. He was a round, fat man with puffed-out cheeks and wispy grey hair, but his anger was giving him speed, and I could feel him closing in. I spun round, still on the run, and threw the peach back at him. The fruit, having got quite squishy by now from being gripped in my hot little hand, landed smack in the middle of his fat face. This gave me enough time to escape and hide amid the crowded shoppers. My childish logic at the time was, the man had a whole pile of peaches. He wouldn't have missed just the one. A few days later, Nan and I were shopping down the market. I'd forgotten all about my attempted peach heist, but the disgruntled greengrocer had not, and recognising the little schnorrer who had given him a wet peachy cheek, came around to the front of the stall. He told Nan what I had done, but was more upset by the very bad word I called him rather than the stolen peach. I didn't know it until years later that smock is a very nasty Yiddish expletive, akin to the Anglo-Saxon C word, and of course very offensive, especially being shouted at to a grown-up by a little kid. Nan was so embarrassed she offered to pay the man for the peach, but he wouldn't hear of it. I expect a squashed peach was hard to put a price on, but I paid for it in other ways. I was put to bed that night with a sore bottom. Fagin would not have been very pleased. I love fruit, I still do, but in 1950 I think it was a luxury Nan could rarely afford. My desire for a crispy apple, juicy pear, peach or orange was satisfied for a while when I discovered that some of the garages by our flats housed a couple of fruit and veg stalls overnight. Possibly one of the stalls belonged to the disgruntled grocer. If that thought entered my head, I don't remember, but I kind of hope it was. Serve him right for upsetting my nan and getting me a smacked arse. Brenda and I found we could squeeze in the gap behind the garages and get our skinny little arms through the splits in the wooden rear structure to ferret out the fruit from the stalls that were pushed up against it. But alas, one day we were spotted by a noisy neighbour who must have spotted us slipping in behind the garages. I came out sucking on a nice juicy pear and walked right into her. She didn't know who I was, but she did recognise Brenda and said, "If I see you go behind those garages again, Brenda, I'll tell your parents." I stood there frozen to the spot, hoping she didn't know my nan. I could hear Brenda behind me grizzle something between an apology and a "Thank you, missus." The woman left. We finished our fruit, but I knew the blame would be shared if Brenda's mum got wind of it, so we took heed and didn't nick any more. I mean, when you think about it, it was a Cockney's kid version of scrumping, a step or two along the food chain from the actual orchard a few miles away in Essex or Kent. Most mornings, I'd wake up to the sound of the old Bigle seller shouting through the early morning streets, hawking her wares. "Bigles, hop, Bigles!" Nan sometimes sent me out to buy some for breakfast. The vendor was quite intimidating, towering over me in a long brown overcoat, with a large wicker basket tucked over her huge arms just above my head. Looking up, proffering my coppers, "2 Bigles, please, missus." Looking down at me, she always seemed to give me the evil eye as she took my money and handed me the warm ringed rolls. Well, perhaps a kid like me had run off once without paying. It wasn't me, honest. Every Sunday, Wentworth Street Market expands beyond Middlesex Street, spreading out like a huge octopus with its far-reaching tentacles throughout the adjoining streets and car parks, dwarfing the regular stallholders and becoming the world-famous Petticoat Lane. By late morning, the walking pace is rendered to a shuffle because of the volume of folk, either looking for a bargain or just there to experience the atmosphere. The lane is so famous people come from all over the world as a must-see on their tourist itinerary. The lane sold practically everything. The heady mix of noise and smells always sent my heart a patter. The aroma of the mouth-watering pickled herrings, my favourite, the warm doughy bagels, mixing with the smell of hot peas pudding, never failed to start my tummy rumbling. Further down through the market, the sweet scent of newly cut flowers, fresh fruit and vegetables took over. Even the linen and clothes stores had a musty type of waft all of their own. You could buy any household items you needed, from a set of knives to a dining table and chairs. There was much entertainment provided by the patter and showmanship of some of the traders. I loved to watch the crockery vendors pile an entire setting onto a large plate and then send the lot high up into the air, catching the construction on the way down to demonstrate the robustness of the porcelain. It was fantastic listening to the barrow boys patter, bringing down the price of a set of goods to a seemingly unbelievable bargain. And no, he was still making a profit. "Here, I'm going to put this brush set, a plug-in radio, a nice set of tablecloths, a tea towels, and to top it off with a torch with batteries so your old man can see what he's doing in the dark. I'm not asking £1, not 15 bob, not even 10. Come on," and then hitting the pile of goodies he's holding up, "who'll give us 2 half-crowns, 5 shillings? It's a blooming bargain. You, madam, sir, my lovely assistant, my trouble and strife, is filling the bags as fast as you can. No, she ain't for sale, Gov. I haven't got a bag big enough to put her in." At the edge of the pavement for a quick getaway, you might see a group of men gathered round a board, set up on a couple of boxes. They'd be playing the 3-shell trick or find the lady. The sharks would fleece the gullible, who placed their bets in an attempt to choose the right shell with the bead under it or the court card between a set of 3. The sharks would have a lookout, watching for the coppers, and a bogus player, part of the team, always managed to win, enticing the mug punters to place their bets. "Come on, fancy your luck, chum. Find the lady, double your money." The dealer would show that the court card was there amid the 3, and place the cards face down on the board table, then move them swiftly about for the punter to place his bet where he thought the card was. If there was only a single punter who had chosen the wrong card but wanted to play on, he wouldn't actually lose his stake as long as he doubled it. And after 3 or so drops, with the stake being doubled each time, the team's bogus player would move in, place a bet that matched the punter's pot, and of course find the court card, and the game was over. I saw some old bloke who tried to pull out his original wager without doubling his bet. The card dealer had a tight grip on the guy's wrist, and there was quite an arm wrestle until he shuffled away by the dealer's cronies. The sharks, ever watchful that someone would call copper, would slip away into the throng and wait probably until they felt safe to set up again. Once, when I was older, I tried to place a bet just when I thought the fraudulent punter player had placed his, but they seemed to have a sixth sense about their con. I lost me half a crown and never tried again. Recently, I played the part of a market trader in an episode of The Crown showing on Netflix. It was about the life of our present queen from a young princess to the present day. Well, the audition got me the part, as I was asked to improvise. I went straight into the patter I remembered from my kidhood. The best line, "Lovely King Edwards, I've kept the eyes in, see you through the week." Pause for laughter. Sad to say, the episode was too long and they cut the market scene. But I did get the job, I played the part, and I was paid. I attended a Jewish school, often ate kosher food, spoke a smattering of street Yiddish, and even attended classes for a while. I was leaving school one Friday and an older boy told me I must go to Hebrew classes. He obviously assumed I was a Jewish boy too and was not honouring the faith. Didn't question the boy. I never thought we were different in any way. And when he said, "You must go to Cheder, Hebrew classes," well, I went along with the boy to join the other kids in a room at the rear of a local synagogue. The other kids all had their own tiny prayer hats, the size of saucers. But the rabbi, spotting me without one, plopped a spare on my head. We sat in these pews while the old rabbi talked in Hebrew and English, none of which made sense to me. I told my nan about the class. She said, "That's nice, Robbie." I sit there looking at the old bearded guy wearing funny clothes, spouting on about stuff I did not understand, and hoping he wouldn't ask me anything. The rabbi did give me a curious look from time to time. Perhaps he was thinking, what is this little boy doing here? I expect he knew I was a little goy kid, but didn't have the heart to stop me attending. If that was the case, he needn't have worried. After a few weeks, I began to give the classes a swerve and use the time to skive off somewhere. Although I don't recall any of the Hebrew the rabbi was trying to teach us, I did feel so much in common with my friends and neighbours. I mused later in life, I must have at least a trickle of Jewish blood running through my veins, some Mosin DNA in the mix. But sadly, I later discovered there isn't. When I was older, and asked Nan why she let me go to the classes. Well, I thought it was a good idea. You might learn something, and I suppose I didn't want you to feel different from your fellow chums. Many years later, I would return to this very synagogue, but for a very different reason. Some kids with a bike had a paper round to supplement their pocket money. I also had a paper round, but in reverse. Instead of delivering, I collected. Every now and then, I'd knock on the doors of my neighbours' flats to inquire if they had any old comics or magazines they had finished with. If I got a decent enough haul, I'd pop down the market, usually midweek, and set out my wares on an empty stall that wasn't being used. Occasionally I'd get kicked off by a stall holder who was setting up late in the day or waiting for his swag to arrive. Most time, though, my luck was in, and I'd set out my wares of second-hand comics and magazines or any other useful items I'd found amid the rubbish after the market had finished for the day. With my swag assembled and emulating my fellow market traders, I'd pipe up, "Here we are then, get your comics and magazines, only a week old. Beano, Dandy, Eagle, Woman's Weekly, Red Letter Day, all half price. How about this fire engine? Lead Soldier, lorry. Only needs a bit of glue and it's brand spanking new." On a good day I can more than double my Sunday sixpence. One afternoon my reverse paper round collection wasn't going so well. I think I'd only managed to collect a few dog-eared magazines and last night's evening paper. I probably hadn't left it long enough between rounds. As I disconsolately made my way along the top landing of our flats, I was thinking of packing it in for the day. I gave one more neighbour's knocker a good rat-a-tat. I waited. The flat door opened, and I looked up to see a jolly-faced woman smiling down at me. "Hello, bubbler. What can I do for you?" "Any old comics or mags you finished with, missus?" The jolly-faced lady paused for a moment, then asked me to wait, and after a few minutes she returned, holding a shoebox. "I haven't any magazines or comics, but do you want these? They were my daughter's who's gone to live in America." Well, I took the cardboard box from her and looked inside. To find it full of postcard-sized black and white photographs of smiling, well-groomed men and women. I hesitated. They weren't my usual swag, and for the life of me I couldn't think why anyone would want to buy photos of complete strangers. But not wanting to hurt the lady's feelings, I took the snaps off her hands. Well, I thought it's better than nothing. With little hope, I left our block, crossing the yard, carrying my shoddy wares and photos in some old shopping bags belonging to me nan, and out through the gate into the market. That particular day the market was bustling with shoppers. All the stalls were full, taken up by the legitimate fee-paying vendors. But being an enterprising, cheeky little sod, I spied a couple of unused empty fruit boxes at the side of a stall. I asked the stall-holder, "Can I lend them boxes, mister?" Well, very obligingly, he said yes. I placed the boxes far back against the wall, away from the stalls, making sure I wasn't in the shopper's way walking past on the pavement. I sat on one box, with my skinny knees pressed up against the other, placed in front of me as my improvised stall. I was feeling a bit embarrassed about my lonely setup, and even more so when I set out my shoddy wares of a couple of old mags and papers. But I decided I might as well give it a go for a little while. Then, if there was no takers, I'd pack up and go home. Tentatively, I squeaked up, "Here we are then, all half price now, all stocks must go." Looking up from the pavement level, watching long legs striding back and forth without a moment's pause to look down at my sparse array, I felt hopeless and dejected. I had the photos my jolly neighbour had given me still in the shoebox. In an attempt to fill up the top of my makeshift stall, I thought I'd liven it up a bit, and I decided to spread the snaps out between the gaps of my dog-eared papers. A few minutes passed, when all of a sudden a pair of long grey flannelled legs stopped, and a voice said, "Are you selling those photos?" I looked up into the face of a big boy, who was probably about 17, who was looking down inquiringly. I nodded. "How much are they, that one?" I was unprepared and so disdainful of the snaps, I hadn't bothered to give them a price tag. I took up the photo he was interested in. This one, twopence." I made my first sale. I had quite a few of the photos in the shoebox the lady had given me, probably about 50 or more. Well, encouraged by the boy's purchase, I began to lay them all out on my shoebox stall as fast as I could. In just a few minutes, it seemed, a crowd of punters gathered around me, wanting to buy the glossy photographs of well-groomed, smiling strangers. I had no idea why, but the proffered hands waving above me were holding good coin of the realm. I gradually began to raise my prices. "Threepence, 2 for 4pence, 6pence that one." They were being snapped up like hot bagels on a cold night. I thought the last few pretty ladies might be worth more, so I took a chance and asked for a shilling. That's doubling my weekly pocket money for a single postcard-sized black and white glossy photograph of a complete stranger. At the time it was incomprehensible to me why anyone would want them. I had sold the lot in minutes. The circle of punters, some curious, other eager to buy, gathered around, soon trickled away after the last sale. None of the photo-buying punters were interested in my old mags and papers. A little old lady looked down vaguely interested, so I chirped up, "The lot for a penny, missus." Finding her purse, she ferreted out the copper coin. "Here you are, dear." I had sold out. All stocks must go, and they had. I looked down at my old tobacco tin I used as my till. I could see it was full to almost overflowing. There were threepenny bits, a couple of old tanners glistening between the pile of copper coins. Just as I was musing about what I'd buy first with my windfall, I heard a voice I knew well. "Hello, Robbie. Blimey, where'd you get all that money from?" It was me nan, and cash always being tight, I had no choice but to copper up to her so she could spend the lot most wisely on my behalf. That evening we had our favourite for dinner, and we called it tea, stuffed breast of lamb followed by ice cream. We bought Uncle Jim a miniature bottle of brandy and shared what was left of the best reverse paper round I ever had. Years later, I realised the black and white glossy photos were probably that of film stars of the day, mugshots for the fans. Possibly Monroe, Bogart, George Raft, even Ronald Reagan. I'll never know. I don't think mugshots of Hollywood film stars were so easily or cheaply come by in those early post-war years. What gives my assumption some credence is, the jolly lady who gave them to me said the snaps were sent to her by her daughter who was living in America. Well, perhaps she was another war bride like my mother. Those days the USA was the main domain of all things glamorous and glossy. I was soon knocking on my neighbour's door asking for more, but alas, that was it. I believe one prominent businessman, Lord Alan Sugar, got his start as a storeholder down the lane. Well, given my entrepreneurial spirits as a kid, I may have missed my vocation. Uncle Jim was quite tall, but very thin, his fragile frame being eaten away by the stomach cancer. Eva was the complete opposite. She was short and round, with a good appetite and, in the main, in robust health. Nan had a ready smile. She loved children, eager to do a kindness whenever she could. She had great personal dignity, and always known as Mrs. Moore. Only family and one or two close friends called her Eva. Uncle Jim had passed away when I was still a little boy, so I only have a few clear memories of our time together. Jim had been a chauffeur at one time, and during the Second World War he drove an ambulance. Later in life, when he was still able to work, he drove a van for the GPO. One day, well, it must have been during the school holidays, and with no one to look after me, no such thing as proper childminders then, he took me to work with him in the post office van. I remember being fascinated by the large brown plastic steering wheel that Jim never stopped jiggling about all the time, even when we weren't moving. When he saw any post office vans nearby, he'd whisper, "Quick, duck down, Robbie." It's obviously against the rules to carry a passenger in the van, especially a little kid. Sadly, my time as a driver's mate was only a one-off. Someone must have seen us because he got a ticking off, as he put it, from his superiors. Jim often had to go into hospital for an operation. The cancer had almost eaten his stomach away and was partly replaced by a sheep's stomach. I, being too young, wasn't allowed into the ward, so I'd just stand outside and wave to him. It was very scary to see my Uncle Jim lying in bed with all sorts of plastic rubbery tubes coming out of him. Because of his ill health, Jim had little energy for the joys of life. But I do remember him bouncing me on his knee at the dinner table one day. We must have been having fish for tea, because he was singing in his Dublin Irish brogue, "Dance for your daddy, my little laddie. You shall have a fishy on your little dishy when the boat comes in." I was laughing with surprised delight, because those memories of fun with him were rare. Eventually, Jim became too ill to hold down a job and stayed at home. Nan was working, so it was Jim's task to look after me when I came home from school or during the school holidays. One day, when Nan was at work, Jim decided to clean the exterior windows of our top-floor flat. They were very dirty. He opened the sash window and sat on the sill with himself outside and his spindly legs dangling inside the room. I watched him as he wiped away the grime with a damp cloth. Suddenly, the window dropped down onto his skinny legs, trapping him. Jimmy, he wriggled about trying to lift the window, but it wouldn't budge. His muffled voice coming from outside was full of understandable panic. "Christ almighty, Robbie, 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 lift up the window." I tried to push up the frame, but I wasn't strong enough. "Fucking hell, go next door, go next door." He was gesturing to our next-door neighbour's flat. I hurried out the front door and gave next door's knocker a good rat-a-tat-tat. Thankfully, the man was at home. "Come quickly, Uncle Jim is trapped in the window." Straight away he followed me back into ours and, seeing Jim's predicament, lifted up the window. "Bloody Nora, Jim, what the hell have you been up to?" Jim fell down, and as he slid inside the room, kneeling on the floor, he was coughing, almost retching, trying to get the breath back into his fragile lungs. After a few minutes, with as much dignity as he could muster, he got up and slumped down onto his chair. "Okay, thanks. Thanks for your help. I'll be just fine." Our rescuer closed the window, and making sure Jim was settled, he left. "Now, Robbie, don't you tell Nanny. It'd only upset her, it'd worry her. All right, son?" I swore not to tell, and I never did. But I think our friendly neighbour grassed him up, because a day or so later I heard Nan tear him off a strip, making him promise, "You must not do such a silly, dangerous thing again, Jim." Who looks out the back window, anyway? I didn't have a good sense of time as a kid, and would often return home much later than I was supposed to, having got involved in some game or other with the local kids a few streets away. When it got dark, as it often did, I knew I was in trouble, especially when hearing, not for the first time, my name echoing through the dark, empty streets. Nan frantically calling out, "Robert! Robert!" When my nanny gave me my full moniker, I knew I was in deep trouble. It must have been after one of those episodes that I was made to stay home inside the flat all day, to be watched by Uncle Jim while Nan went to work. It was the summertime. I begged, I pleaded, "I'll be a good boy. I'll stay in the square." The square is what we called the courtyard surrounding our housing estate, but Jim had strict instructions not to let me out of his sight. I wasn't even allowed to sit outside our front door on the balcony. The door was locked from the inside, with Jim having the key tucked safely in his waistcoat pocket. There was no chance of me waiting for him to doze off, then sneak out quietly, easing the front door shut. After a couple of stamping tantrums to no avail, I went up to my bedroom, leaving Jim smoking and taking sips from a miniature brandy bottle to help ease the pain. How my Nan could afford his gold flake cigarettes and that occasional tiny bottle of comfort, I'll never know. Back in my room, I thumped the stuffing out of my Teddy, who I knew was laughing at me. As I lay unhappily on my bed, grizzling away, I could see out the top window frame, a tantalizing blue square of the sunny Aldgate sky. Slowly, an idea began to take shape. I got up and opened the window, stretching my scrawny little neck out to breathe in the tantalizing smell of East London basking in the heat. 2 flats along lived Brenda, and I knew Brenda would be willing to partner in my great escape. I went into action. I climbed out of the window and onto the exterior narrow ledge that circled round the roof. If I fell, it could be certain death. But being a kid, danger was an emotion I had yet to cultivate, except when Nan was cross with me. I was desperate, and I thought it was a chance worth taking. Could not stay cooped up in that stuffy flat with Uncle Jim dozing off in the chair all day. I slowly sidestepped along, crab-like, until I reached the exterior of Brenda's flat. I reached the window and knocked. Nothing. I looked inside. The room had a single bed with a cloth dolly on a pillow. Around the room were a lot of girly clothes and toys. This was Brenda's room. So far, so good. My plan further hinged on Brenda being at home. I actually hoped she'd even be in her room, but I could see that I was pushing me luck a bit too far. Well, the first part of my plan had worked. I tapped gently on the window, hoping Brenda would be the one to hear me. I called out, "Hello? Brenda? Hello? Cooey?" No reply. I tried again, a bit louder this time. "Hello, anyone at home?" No one stirred from inside. What to do now? I could see the window was just pulled to, and not bolted or secured in any way. I gripped the edge of the frame with my fingers and gave it a tug. The window sprung open, nearly sending me to Splat City onto the courtyard below. That's about 100 foot or more. Gained my balance, and I tumbled into Brenda's bedroom with a thump, ow! All was still for a few seconds, and then a voice I recognised as Brenda's mum called up with nervous trepidation, "Hello?" Who's there?" "Oh, it's only me, Robert. Next door but one," I called cheerily back, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to drop in from the room above, to perhaps borrow a cup of sugar or milk. I came to the bedroom door to see Brenda and her mum looking up at me from the foot of the stairs. Brenda's expression on seeing her sweetheart at the top of her very stairs was a mixture of joy, love and confusion. Her mum looked completely perplexed and uncomprehending. "What? How'd you get up there?" Slowly descending down to join my surprise hosts, I had my story ready. "Uncle Jim is fast asleep with the door key in his pocket. And, him being ill, I didn't want to wake him up to let me out the door." Miraculously, she seemed to believe me, and we settled down to cups of tea and marmalade sandwiches. Almost Enid Blyton, isn't it? Once I felt fortified enough, I thanked my host and hit the streets. Brenda wanted to come with, but thankfully her mum wouldn't let her. She probably felt her daughter needed protecting from this daring, sure-footed young scamp from next door but one. I knew I'd been very bad and wasn't feeling very adventurous. I wandered about, going nowhere in particular. Those days, kids were a lot safer in the London streets. I occasionally popped across the big main road to the bus terminal to look for any dropped coins. I often found a farthing. Find 3 more and I'd have a penny, enough to buy a few sweets. Sometimes I would find a full penny, and once a whole half-crown. 2 and 6. It's worth over £1 these days. A couple of us kids would roam as far as the Tower of London. I remember one kid and I think his name was Moisha, and we went as far as Westminster Bridge by Big Ben. We spent many a happy hour asking passers-by, "Excuse me, have you got the time, please?" We'd laugh fit to burst if they looked at their watches. Quite a few spotted the lark and joined in the joke. I think the 1950s were a much safer place for us kids, because it wasn't long after the war. Life was precious, with folk feeling more protected towards each other, and in particular the young. Many had died and many sacrifices had been made for my tomorrow. But on the day of my great escape, I didn't stray very far from Wentworth Street. The market was shutting down for the day as I shuffled and scuffed my feet through the rubbish, looking for any half-broken toys, anything I might be able to mend, play with, or perhaps shift for a few pence. Time had flown by, as it always seemed to, and the guilt of what I had achieved made me more vigilant than usual. I knew I'd better get back before Nan came home from work, but how? I returned to Brenda's and knocked on her door. Her mum answered. "Oh, hello, it's me. Sorry to trouble you again, but I can't wake Uncle Jim. I can't make him hear me. I'm knocking on the door, but I think he must be in a very deep sleep. Oh, could I climb back the way I came?" I must have been very persuasive, because, with some trepidation it's true, Brenda's mum watched me crab creep back along the narrow ledge the way I had come, and enter my own bedroom window. I jumped inside and crept downstairs. Uncle Jim was waiting at the bottom, brandishing a poker, ready to fight off and defend his hearth and home against the intruder he thought was creeping down from above. But seeing me, "Where the fucking hell have you been?" "I've been upstairs." "No, you have not. I went up, you didn't answer, and you were gone." Poor Jim. He must have been frantic with worry. Having woken up to discover that I had absconded, with the front door still locked, and him still having the door key in his waistcoat pocket. I don't think he could work it out. How did I get out? He was much too ill to go looking for me, and telephones in those days would be rare indeed for a working-class household. I had to fess up. When Nan was told of my very bad and life-risking antics, she ordered Jim to take me into the bedroom and give me the strap, referring to the thick leather-buckled belt he wore round his skinny waist to keep up his trousers. I'd never been sentenced to the strap before, but I suppose the punishment in this case fitted the crime. Jim shuffled me upstairs and into my bedroom. He closed the door and took off his belt. He held it high in the air and, whispering, "Squeal, you bugger!" he brought the belt swishing down with a mighty thwack onto the bed, missing me by a good few feet. "Go on again." Well, I got the hang of it this time, and as the bell hit the bell, I went, "Ah!" cried out. "Ah!" I gave such a painful, pitiful screech on the third occasion. As Jim raised the bell one more time, the door swung open with Nan shouting, "No, no, stop it, that's enough, that's enough." Thwack! Jim hit the bed again. We froze as she took in the scene. Nan started laughing first. I think she was relieved that our naughty boy wasn't actually being murdered. Jim and I joined in the laughter, and relieved, I think, that Nan could see the funny side of it first. And all was forgotten, for now. Nan's shop was in Burslem Street. It's in Whitechapel. The street is no longer there, but it was just off the commercial road. The shop front had an imposing brown door between two large windows, with curtains hanging up inside of some indiscriminate light net material. Inside one of the windows stood a model of a woman's head with a feathered hat on. What the head had to do with cleaning dirty washing, I've no idea. Maybe the shop was once a haberdasher's. When Nan opened up, the first thing that hit you was the damp, musty waft from the pile of full Hessian sacks. There would be two piles, one of dirty washing, waiting for the van to collect and taken to the laundry, the other of clean clothes, ready and waiting for the customers. Nan stood serving in her white linen overall behind a wooden counter. On the shelves behind her there were parcels of clothes tied up with string and brown paper, and these were labelled to be dry cleaned. The walls, the door, everything was painted in the obligatory brown and dark green. Brown and green seemed to be the only paints available in the 1950s. I think the government had a surplus of it left over from the war. Well, perhaps it was camouflage paint. After my great escape episode, Nan decided that in the school holidays she would take me to work with her. At first, Nan kept me in the shop, hoping a few toys and colouring books and crayons would keep me from under her feet. But a little kid becomes easily bored and has a knack of getting in the way or constantly wanting attention. Eventually, she was forced to let me out to play, just for an hour or so, Robert. I got me full moniker, so I knew she meant it. But of course, time would fly by. I'd get so distracted, usually by rummaging about in the bombed-out houses of the local kids, looking for treasure. We'd play war games, hide and seek, or take turns riding a go-kart fashioned together by one of the kids' dads from wooden boxes and pram wheels. On more than one occasion, I arrived back late, finding Nan waiting outside the closed shop with her coat on, ready to go home. In a furious temper, she dragged me along to get the bus. Nan's evening ahead would be to see to Jim, make a meal, sort me out, and get herself ready for the next day, and then so to bed. After one very late return to the shop, Nan said, "Now, you be late once more, Robert, and I swear I'll shut up the shop and leave without you. You mark my words." A day or so later, like most kids with a short memory and only living in the present, with Nan's threats completely forgotten, the hours flew by too fast once again. I knew I was in big trouble. But I never imagined Nan would carry out her threat and abandon me. I sprinted through the darkened streets, but when I reached the shop, I couldn't believe it. The door was locked and bolted. My Nanny was nowhere to be seen. I banged on the big brown door, thinking she was only trying to teach me a lesson and was just waiting inside. I looked through the window, but all was dark. All I could see was the white labels on the front of the brown paper parcels on the dry cleaning shelves. I was frantic. "Nanny! Oh, Nanny!" There was no sound from inside the shop. She didn't come out. I eventually realized my Nanny had truly abandoned me. I slumped down, sobbing, in the front step of the shop. I didn't know what to do. Maybe if I just waited there, Nan would come back for me. It began to get really dark, and I began to get really worried. A lady across the street, seeing me in the doorway, came over. I think she must have been one of Nan's customers because she knew my name. What's the matter, Robert? My Nan has gone. She's gone home without me. I was late back. The lady looked into the shop, then up the street, and not sure what to do with this abandoned little boy. It must have been confusing for her to take in what I just said, that my nanny had gone home without me. What must the lady be thinking? Had there been a robbery? Was his nan, in fact, laying dead inside the shop? But then it was locked up. Had she run off with her fancy man, or had a turn, forgetting completely she had a grandson at all? As luck would have it, the lady spotted a police car cruising at the end of the street and began jumping up and down, waving and shouting, "Copper! Hey, copper!" The lady grabbed my hand and we ran down the street. The police car stopped. She must have told the cops that I got lost or something, and then she speedily hurried away, leaving me with the law. The next thing, I was sitting in front of the car next to a big blue uniformed policeman. I haven't been in many cars, and I've never been in a big black police car, but now I was being driven through the streets of Whitechapel like a villain I'd seen in the films. I knew then I was in the biggest trouble ever. "Where do you live, son?" "Do you know the address?" "Broome House." "Would you know the way?" Now, I was just a kid. I was taken to places. I didn't take much notice of how we got there. I knew we caught a bus. I knew in which direction the bus travelled. It turned left up the main road. How it all worked from then, I wasn't all that sure. I did, however, remember the number of the bus and one building it passed. Our block of flats was by a market near Gardener's Corner. Once we turned into the market area, which was closed by that time, I knew I was at home. Any vehicle that wasn't a delivery van or a lorry by our flats in those days was an uncommon sight, but a police car, that was very rare. I could see one or two onlookers had stopped to stare. As I was escorted through the gate into the yard of our housing estate between two policemen, I felt like a major criminal. "Where do you live, son?" one of the coppers asked. I looked up and pointed. Now that's our flat on the top floor, the one in the middle with the red and white sticky stuff sticking on the lab window. At that moment Nan appeared on the balcony, shaking her fists at us, or rather me. I expect she must have been watching out, hoping I would somehow make my way home. I've never really tried to analyse how or why Nan did such a thing as leaving a little boy about 7 years old in the street like that, but she did, and this is what happened. Perhaps she was hormonal. I should think she must have been getting very anxious about her irrational behaviour to teach me a lesson. I could see, even from that distance, that she was very het up. Nan met me and one of the coppers halfway up our housing block stairs. She became very subdued as we made our way up to our landing, because the copper was having a serious talk with her about what she had done. It was an odd feeling watching my nanny getting a telling off, something I'd never seen anyone do before. Once the coppers had gone, I thought I was really for it, but instead Nan gave me a cuddle and a subdued warning for being a naughty boy. From then on, Nan only took me to work if she had no option, with the proviso I had to stay in sight of the shop, but I expect I still strayed occasionally. Now, Gardener's Corner became known as the gateway to the East End. It named after the big store that once stood there, separating Commercial Road from Whitechapel. The Scottish clothing store, with its distinctive clock tower, gave its name to the road junction that was laid out in the 1870s. The junction brought together the 5 main thoroughfares of East London: Commercial Road, Lemon Street, Aldgate High Street, Commercial Street, and Whitechapel High Street.